Let's talk about monuments. What is a monument? So in our complex D&D games, in our complex D&D combat situations, we sometimes like to dork with the environment instead of just messing around with monsters versus characters. And you can dork with the environment in a bunch of different ways. You can have elevation, you can change the terrain, you can put levels and stairs and difficult terrain to get around and other things. But a very common thing to put in, particularly in complex fights, are ideas that I call monuments. A monument is essentially some kind of structure, like a statue or a obsidian obelisk or a pool or something, some kind of fixed object that does something that affects the game around it. I have an article on Sly Flourish called Anatomy of an Environmental Effect, Chernobog's Well, and it talked about a particular monument that did something in the combat of the game, that it had a story-based effect. There was a reason why it was there. It did things to affect the monsters, and it had ways for the characters to mess with the thing to disable it. And that's the kind of thing that I think about in a monument. This came back to mind because I'm playing Baldur's Gate 3, and some of the bigger battles in Baldur's Gate 3 has this idea in it. Objects that you have to interact with in order to change the situation in a battle. Sometimes you have to mess with these objects. Other times there are things where things will be definitely easier if you mess with these objects than if you don't mess with the objects, or maybe you even get a benefit from them. One key to monuments, though, is that they are hard to improvise, that it's difficult to come up with ways to just build them on the fly. And I haven't found a good way. One of my failings as a DM is that I will put an idea of a monument into a battle and then not realize how it's going to come into play. This just happened to me last week. We had a great big battle, big hole in the ground, big powerful monsters, 5 level 9 characters fighting 2 fallen celestials, CR10 celestials plus a CR10 high priest, ghoul priest, all of whom could fly so they couldn't be thrown down pits. And I had a statue of the king of ghouls, the god of ghouls, Vardazane, the Ghoul King. And I wanted to use that statue to have some kind of effect on the game. The players assumed there would be, and I didn't come up with a good system. I basically said the statue is responsible for surrounding the high priest in a swarm of insects. That if you were going to go and screw with them, you were going to step into the swarm, you're going to get eaten up by bugs, and it's because of that stupid statue. And so the characters immediately started blasting with shatter, and I'm like, I don't know how many hit points it has. I'm like, yeah, that did a lot. Oh, you almost destroyed it. Yay, you destroyed it, right? And I kind of just improvised the hit points on the fly. And I realized, I could have done better. I could have had a better understanding of what this monument is and what it does and how we could use it. And that's what we're going to talk about today. How can you do that? And we're going to do it with lazy principles. You are probably, if you're going to drop these monuments in, it is worth your time to prepare the monument ahead of time so you know what it does, you know how it works. You can still have dials on it, so you can still change things during the game if it's not working exactly as you want. You can still screw with it in the game, but you should at least have a baseline, the same way we have a baseline for a monster stat block. And actually, that's exactly where we come in with the lazy part of it. If you're going to build a monument, an easy way to build a monument is to ask yourself, what challenge rating is this monument? And you can use the table from Forge of Foes, so you can actually treat the monument as though it is a monster, and you can use the stat block from Forge of Foes, my book that I worked on with Scott Gray and Teos Abadia that helps you quickly improvise monsters, change monsters, understand the tactics for monsters. And we talk about this idea of using them as monuments inside the book itself. But you can use the table. The table is available from the sample chapters, and you basically pick a challenge rating. So you say, if I'm going to have a big statue of Vardazane the Ghoul King that's going to be screwing with the environment, what kind of stats should that statue have? And I could say, well, probably not a CR10. That would be a pretty powerful statue. Maybe a CR5 or 6. So we could say, we'll make it a CR5, right? And that means its AC is 15. It has 95 hit points. If it's doing an attack bonus, it's +7. If it's doing damage, it's doing 35. It has number of attacks, everything else. So you have these stats. And for some monuments, you might just say, all I really need is the armor class and the hit points, because it's just how much does it take to destroy it. Now, you can also use that armor class as a DC if somebody wants to disable it. And you could essentially say something like, it's going to take so many attempts to disable this thing before it's destroyed. If you have one central monument, 3 times is probably good. If you have a bunch of monuments, maybe you only have to do it once, right? Maybe that one good effect. You're basically saying how many actions should it take a character to destroy this monument? Successful actions should it take for the characters to destroy this monument? But you can use the DC right off that table. You say it's a CR5, and you say that it has, a DC of 15, DC 15 Arcana check to channel energy into it to try to draw the energy away from this monument that's doing that thing. Decide how many times it takes for that to succeed. You could even convert that over to damage and say, we'll call that 30 damage, or we'll call it 35 damage. You could basically say, if it has 95 hit points, then say we'll do 35 damage per success of damage to the object as you're channeling the energy in, which is like the equivalent if they blasted it with a lightning bolt or went over and spent all their actions to destroy it anyway, at 9th level anyway. So you can kind of build the stats on that. But what do the monuments do? What do you want these things to do? And how do you do that? So I came up with this thought of here are 20 possible things that a monument can do in a battle. It can offer advantage to particular creatures on attacks or saving throws. So an example would be an unholy monument where all of the skeletons and undead in the area have advantage on their attacks and they get advantage on their saving throws. So all of the undead are powered up. And you could easily describe this. So there's this unholy obelisk in the center of the room and all the skeletons are glowing with violet light that's emanating off of it. And they're like, well, we got to screw with that thing or those guys are going to kick our ass. You could do something like that. Adds damage to particular creatures. Again, like their swords are doing an extra D6 or 2D6. Great way to take low CR monsters and make them really powerful. You could do both of those. So you could have 9th level characters that go into a chamber that's filled with skeletons. And there's a big unholy obelisk in there. And the skeletons all rise up and they're all fueled with necrotic energy and they have advantage on their attacks and they do extra damage. They're way more lethal, even though their hit points are not really that much lower and you can still destroy them really easily. Reduces damage. This is a good one for protecting your boss. If they are protected by an aura that's coming off of it, maybe they resist all damage until that thing is destroyed. So they have basically twice the hit points until you destroy that obelisk. And if the obelisk is easier to destroy than the boss is, they'll want to aim for that first. So you're kind of steering their attention away. Unlocking particular abilities. All the creatures have some new ability that's coming from the obelisk. Access to particular spells they wouldn't otherwise have. Obscuring vision, hindering movement, preventing teleportation. Acting as a vessel for extra concentration. This is a cool one. If you have a lich, what if the lich has these spheres floating around their chamber and each sphere they have lets them concentrate on multiple spells. So they can do Cloud Kill and Globe of Invulnerability and something else. And by destroying those spheres, that's what gets them to lose concentration on those spells. Protective spell effects, again, you could be like a Globe of Invulnerability. Offering regeneration. Maybe they're healing as the obelisk works. Animating dead minions. Again, the unholy one. You're destroying the skeletons. The next round, 2d6 more skeletons rise up. Oh boy, we got to destroy that thing or we're just going to be swimming in skeletons. Granting resistance or immunity to specific damage types. Again, because of the monument, you have fire resist. +2 bonus to attack certain creatures. Providing immunity. So they say, we have complete immunity to all necrotic damage or all force damage or all fire damage or whatever. Giving somebody the ability to fly, summon and controlling a powerful creature, offering legendary resistance, and shrugging off other debilitating effects. If you don't like legendary resistance on a monster, you could apply it to objects in the room that give them legendary resistance. Maybe we destroy those, and that gives us the ability to hit the monster with a big, powerful spell effect. And a damage pulse, the idea that just it's waves of damage hit on initiative 0, a pulse of necrotic energy comes off of this thing and does a bunch of damage to creatures who don't resist necrotic. Another really powerful way to use monuments is to attach spells to them. Spells are a really cool way to have a tiny bundle of custom mechanics that you can apply to magic items, you can apply to certain creatures, you can apply it to monuments. Spells are not just spells. Spells are little bits of effects that you can apply all over the world for all different kinds of things. Really good lazy trick. Reskin spells into environmental effects you throw everywhere else. Here are 10 that are really effective if you throw them on a monument. Globe of Invulnerability. The boss is immune to spells below a certain level till you destroy the monument. Fire Shield. You can hit them and take a bunch of damage, or you could go destroy that monument and then they don't have the fire shield anymore. Spirit Guardians, big swirling thing around the boss or around the monument, and every time you go in, you take damage until you destroy it. Spiritual weapons, maybe multiple spirit weapons. There are 4 monuments, each of which have spirit weapons that are going off and attacking people, but if you destroy the monument, you destroy the spirit weapon. Darkness, Stone Skin, protection from good, greater invisibility, silence, and anti-magic field. All different spells you can put on these monuments in order to give them some kind of power. Really, the reason we're using all of these things, the reason why monuments are powerful is because monuments are basically immune to any status effects. So they're not just a creature anymore. That destroying the monument is really a matter of doing damage to it more than anything else. My group likes to joke that monuments aren't, monuments are scarier than monsters, because monsters we can talk to, we can convince them to do other things, and we can hit them with spells like banish or hold person or other things and kind of stop them. But monuments, you can't do anything to them, and they're going to still kick your ass just as likely as the monster is. So it's kind of funny. But it also brings up a really important point. So we use monuments to shake up our battles. We use them to get the characters to move around the battlefield so they're not standing in one place. We use them to kind of split their targets so they're not just focusing all of their fire on the boss and destroying the boss in one round. They can't do it that way because they have to destroy some of these monuments, or have to deal with some of the monuments, or they're going to be way inefficient in what they're doing. There's a key to a monument, though, which is it's a thin line between a cool monument that really adds a dynamic, fun, new situation to the battle and one that's just a tedious pain in the ass. And it's really important to think about the monument and ask yourself, is this something that's really going to be fun for the characters to deal with? Or is this something that's just going to be a tedious pain in the ass? Because, and even some of these things, the idea of monuments that hinder movement, ones that make creatures immune to certain damage effects. If you overuse these, they're like, oh God, another one of these stupid monuments I got to destroy before I go and I hit the boss. Can't I just go hit the boss? Do I really care? And it's a really thin line in figuring that out. And one question is, are you taking agency away when you put these monuments in place? So I actually think the offensive monuments are better than the defensive ones, because taking damage is scary. Not being able to hit your opponent is just boring, right? That if you say, oh, I just want to go up and do my multi-attack and action surge and hit him again, but I can't do it because that stupid monument is in the way. And as long as that monument is there, I can't hit the main boss. Then it can be kind of tedious. But when you have like a boss where it's like, if I get to him, I'm taking a bunch of damage on the way in. And then when I'm facing him, I'm getting beat up because all these other monsters have all these other abilities. Well, now it's more scary than it is tedious. Bringing everything together, when we're looking at adding monuments to our game, there are a few things we can do, a few questions that we can ask that help us design these monuments that we throw into our big combat encounters. One important point is you don't want to overuse this. You really only want to drop it into big boss fights. You don't need to have monuments in every single battle. You use them too often, they definitely will become tedious, but they can work for kind of big set piece battles where you want them to take a while. You want the characters to do things other than just run around and fight monsters. And that's where they really shine, I think, particularly in boss battles. So the first thing you do is you ask yourself, for this monument, what is it like in the world? How does it work? What is it doing? What does it look like? Is there just one? Are there multiple monuments? But what is it about them that lets them do what they do? These kinds of questions will answer other things like how many successes or fails it takes to destroy. If there's a central pillar with 3 smaller pillars that are channeling energy into it, you know you have to destroy the 3 smaller ones to destroy the center one. Choose the challenge rating and set statistics. Again, how difficult is this thing? You can use CR. A good gauge of like what challenge rating you should have for a monument is that it should be probably equal to the character's levels if there's only one, maybe half the character's levels if you have like 2 or 4 of these things. That's a rough gauge, but you're going to want to look at the challenge rating and decide how hard should these things be. The harder they are to destroy, the harder they are to attack. And if they happen to be doing damage and you're basing it on the damage per challenge rating table, that would be the bigger they are, the more damage they're doing. And then part of this is asking yourself, how many successful checks does it take to destroy one? If there's a number of monuments, maybe it only takes 1. If there's only 1 monument, maybe it takes 3. You could convert successes into damage if you want a way to sort of use hit points and success rolls together. You could say essentially that you do 1/3 of the thing's damage. Whatever hit points it has, a success equals roughly a little bit more than 1/3 of the amount of hit points that it has. And then, of course, you want to give it an effect. What does this thing do? One good way is there a way to turn the effect against the monsters? So let's say you have an arcane pillar, an unstable arcane pillar in the center of your battle, and it's firing off lightning bolts. And the main boss is channeling energy into this pillar and using it to channel off lightning bolts that are hitting on like initiative 0 every time they're going around and blasting everybody. And the characters figure out, if we channel energy, we can actually fire lightning bolts back the other way. Well, now it's not a tedious monument. Now it's like a new thing that they can use. It's a new thing they can work with. Instead of just getting rid of it, they can actually channel it and use it for their own goods. What if there's like a big unholy pool, but you can make it a hallowed pool that gives radiant energy to all of the living creatures instead of necrotic energy to all the dead creatures. So instead of just destroying it, you flip the switch and now it's actually benefiting the characters. That could be a great way to make monuments fun and interesting and not boring and tedious. But you want to focus on, what is that effect? What does it do? Again, look at spell effects. Spell effects are a great thing that you can always add to monsters. But then finally, think about it from the player's perspective. Is this going to be fun, or is this going to be boring? Are you doing it just to protect the boss and make the boss harder to kill? Or is there a really cool story element to it? Or is there a way that the characters can do things with these other than just destroy them that they can turn around? Think about it from the perspective of a player. One thing you'll notice is that video games use these ideas all the time. Actually, what kind of inspired me to work on this was playing Baldur's Gate 3 and seeing all of the different big battles that occur in Baldur's Gate 3 that have these environmental effects, these monuments, these objects that are in the world that are doing things that you have to manipulate. And I was like, oh, of course, we use those in D&D all the time. It's a good thing to talk about. And in some of those battles, they're really cool, and some of those are kind of tedious. So those are things to consider as well. So the next time you're building a big boss battle, think about the monuments that the boss could have in the room, what they could do, how they can make the battle more exciting, and how you can use these to really turn your battle into something that's unique, that has never been done before, and that your players are due to remember.